Okay. Shuru Manuna, I'm ready.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Good evening. A warm welcome to all of you to the webinar series hosted by Advocates Association Bengaluru. We have with us today Mr. Alok Prasannakumar, Advocate and Senior Resident Fellow, Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. Alok, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Vikram. It is my pleasure to be there. Without any further ado, should I just begin the talk now?
No, now I would like to introduce our today's speaker. Mr. Alok Prasannakumar graduated from Nalsar University and also obtained his BCL from Oxford University in the year 2009. He's a co-founder of Vidhi Karnataka. His areas of research includes judicial reforms, constitutional law, urban development, law, and technology. He writes Economic and Political Weekly and has published in the Indian Journal of Constitutional Law and National Law School of India Review, apart from media outlets such as the Hindu, Indian Express, Scroll, Quint, and Caravan. He has practiced before the Supreme Court of India and Delhi High Court from the chambers of Senior Advocate Mr. Mohan Paraswaran. Mr. Alok, on behalf of Advocates Association Bengaluru, I extend a warm welcome to you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vikram. Tumba ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. And ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. Good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking to the Advocates Association of Bengaluru. And I'd like to once again thank Vikram for giving me this opportunity to speak. As you would have seen, the topic of the discussion is whether the 103rd Amendment of the Constitution, 103rd Amendment Act, which specifically provides for reservations for economically weaker sections of society, whether they're constitutionally valid in the sense that whether they're within the basic structure of the Constitution. Today, I want to make two main arguments. I will take about 45 to 50 minutes to describe and discuss what I want to talk about. And part of what I'm saying, of course, no, my matter is still pending in court. We'll know final judgment whenever it comes out. But I want to offer my views as somebody who has studied the reservation system, as somebody who has studied in a reservation system such as ours, and somebody whose views on this subject have changed over the years as I've seen, as I've gotten more experience in life, as I've gotten more understanding of the law and society and so on. So what I want to do with this talk, and hopefully what I want to leave you with at the end of my 45-minute or so talk, is certain thoughts on what reservations are, what they're meant for, what purpose they're achieving, what purpose they're not achieving. And when we criticize or praise any government's move to give or not give reservations, how do we frame our arguments in a constitutional context? My argument is twofold today. In the first part of my talk, I want to make the argument that there is no problem with the 103rd Constitutional Amendment breaching the 50% limit. There is nothing in the amendment itself which says that it will go past 50%. Adre ellu helila 50% ಮೇಲೆ ಹೋಗಬಹುದು ಅಂತ. Adre, and sorry for those who are not very familiar Kannada, I keep slipping between Kannada and English. So wherever possible, I will translate what I said in either languages. Nowhere has it said that it can go beyond 50%. But if you look at SC, ST, and OBC reservations, the only way economically weaker sections reservation is possible is by going past this limit of 50%, and which has also happened in the central government as they have allowed for this. My argument is that there is no constitutional problem with going past the 50% limit. And I will tell you why I make this argument. The second part of my argument is that under our constitutional scheme, reservations for economically weaker sections are not permitted. That means saying that a fixed percentage or a fixed quota of seats or jobs in educational institutions or in government being fixed for persons of, and I will use the term in quotes, economically weaker sections, is not permitted under our constitutional scheme. And when I say constitutional scheme, I mean that this goes against the basic structure of our constitution. I'm sure those of you who have studied constitutional law will know that the Supreme Court has held that the Constitution of India has the basic structure and certain basic features which can never be removed by any amendment of Parliament. Most recently, we have seen that the National Judicial Appointments Commission was struck down by the Supreme Court of India for being against the basic structure of the Constitution. And there have been previous amendments of the Constitution that have been struck down likewise. It is my contention that a move to grant reservations, and specifically I'm saying reservations, for economically weaker sections would go against the Constitution of India. Just to clarify, the consequence of the first argument does not mean that 100% reservation is necessarily okay. The consequence of the second argument is not that no measures can be taken by the government for economically weaker sections. If the government wants to give them more opportunities through fee reductions, through scholarships, through waivers, through special schools, or more opportunities, all of that is fine. My argument only is that fixing a certain number of seats or fixing a certain number of posts on the criteria of economically weaker sections is against the basic structure of the Constitution. Before I get into the meat of the discussion, I want to read out two passages. One is from a judgment and another is from a book. The judgment, a lot of you may have heard of. It is called K.C. Vasantakumar versus State of Karnataka. It's a very famous judgment. Parts of it have been overruled, parts of it have been upheld by the Supreme Court itself at later points of time. I don't want to go into the specific findings of the judgment, but there is one beautiful paragraph written by Justice Chinnappa Reddy, which to me sums up it's a very difficult task to sum up an entire philosophy and an ideology about caste in this country. But what Justice Chinnappa Reddy does very beautifully in this particular paragraph is do that. And I think all lawyers and law students should read and understand this paragraph if they want to really understand the concept of equality and reservations in India. So this is actually paragraph 2 or 3 of his judgment, but I'll just read it out to you. If you wish, you can find this on Indian Qanun also, but this is what Justice Chinnappa Reddy said. The scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, and other socially and educationally backward classes, all of whom have been compendiously described as the weaker sections of the people, have long journeys to make in society. They need aid, they need facility, they need launching, they need propulsion. Their needs are their demands. The demands are matters of right and not philanthropy. They ask for parity and not charity. They claim their constitutional right to equality of status and of opportunity and economic and social justice. Several bridges have to be erected so that they may cross the Rubicon. Professional education and employment under the state are thought to be two such bridges. Hence, the special provision for advancement and for reservation under Articles 15 Clause 4 and 16 Clause 4 of the Constitution. This is a very beautiful way of saying why we have reservations. And most important is that little line in the middle of this passage. They ask for parity and not charity. Reservations are not a way of giving charity to anyone. It is a necessary way if you want an equal and just society. That is what Justice Chinnappa Reddy has said. Justice Chinnappa Reddy, and it's reflected in some ways in the Indra Sani judgment also, which we will come to and discuss in a little while. But I want our viewers to keep this in mind. ಇವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿರೋದು ತುಂಬಾ ಮುಖ್ಯ. ಇದನ್ನ ಮರಿಬೇಡಿ. ನಾನು ಏನ್ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀನೋ ಇದರಿಂದ ಅರ್ಥ ಇದನ್ನ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಾನು ಇನ್ನ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. The second passage that I want to read out is by somebody who is not a lawyer at all. Okay, this is by far one of the greatest scholars in independent India. ಕನ್ನಡದವರಿಗೆ ಹೆಮ್ಮೆ ಇರಬಹುದು ಇವರು ಕನ್ನಡಿಗರೇ ಅಂತ. This is Dr. D.R. Nagaraj. He passed away unfortunately in 1999, and he has written by far one of the best books you'll ever read to understand Gandhism and Ambedkarism, or what we would like to say the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi and the philosophy of Baba Saheb Ambedkar. It's called The Flaming Feet and Other Essays. And one of the essays in that book is called Misplaced Anger, Shrunken Expectations. It's an essay that is about reservation itself, because he was also a member of a backward caste. D.R. Nagaraj was somebody who was closely involved with Dalit movements in Karnataka, Dalit Sangarsh Sene. ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಬರೆದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆನೂ D.R. Nagaraj ಬಗ್ಗೆನೇ ತುಂಬಾ ಜನ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. You should definitely check out his works, and I think you will get an insight into Indian society and state that nobody else, and to be very honest, nobody else has written anything like this. But this is written in 1989-1990. Andre K.C. Vasantakumar judgment was delivered in 85. D.R. Nagaraj is writing this in 89-90. If the gods decide to withdraw from this strife-ridden nation called India, it will not bother the classes and castes warring on the issue of reservations in the least. Since material interest is the only driving religious force of both the old and the new middle classes, and is quite fundamentalist at that, the program of positive discrimination has evoked frenzied reactions. As a result, the debate has turned fiercely ideological with little space for self-doubt. In any case, as Rajni Kothari points out, the violent intensification of the controversy surrounding Rama's birthplace is linked to the militant assertion of the social and political identity of the lower castes, using the recommendations as well as the implementation of the Mandal Commission as a rallying point. Radical political thinkers, including Kothari, argue that Rama was used to split the newly emerging unity of the lower caste in North India. This is how the tumultuous 1990s began. So he sort of says that reservations are a source of controversy and contestation. And because everybody is so focused on what they are getting or not getting out of reservations, nobody is thinking of the larger picture of how what is this doing to the politics of the country? What is this doing to society? What is this doing to the social fabric of the country? And keep in mind, he was writing this immediately after the Mandal agitation, where you've had people threaten to immolate themselves for the implementation of OBC reservations and so on. So he has a certain context in which it is coming from. If OBC reservations were one big step in moving the conversation on reservations forward and expanding to more people, the next big step has been the 103rd Amendment to the Constitution of India in terms of extending it to economically weaker sections. So what does 103rd Amendment say? Okay, and because I'm going to be talking about this, I want to read out this clause. What is it that 103rd Constitution Amendment has actually done? Okay, this came into force 2019 in January last year. You may know that this is under challenge in court. So in Article 15 of the Constitution, after Clause 5, the following clause shall be inserted. Namely, nothing in this article or subclause G of Clause 1 of Article 19 or Clause 2 of Article 29. This is mostly to take care of private educational institutions and minority private educational institutions, shall prevent the state from making any special provision for the advancement of any weaker sections of citizens, economically weaker sections of citizens, other than the classes mentioned in clauses 4 and 5, and B, any special provision for the advancement of any economically weaker sections of citizens other than the classes mentioned in clauses 4 and 5, insofar as such special provisions relate to their admission to educational institutions, including private educational institutions, whether aided or unaided by the state, other than the minority educational institutions referred to in clause 1 of 30, which in the case of reservations shall be in addition to the existing reservations and subject to a maximum of 10% of the total seats in each category. Okay. And for the purposes of this article and Article 16, there's an explanation which says, for the purposes of this article and Article 16, economically weaker sections shall be such as may be notified by the state from time to time on the basis of family income and other indicators of economically weaker sections, basis of, and very clearly, family income, other indicators of economic disadvantage. Article 16 of the Constitution, after Article 16 of the Constitution, the following clause shall be inserted, after clause 5 of Article 16, following clause shall be inserted, namely, nothing in this article shall prevent the state from making any provision for the reservation of appointments or posts in favor of any economically weaker sections of citizens other than the classes mentioned in clause 4, in addition to the existing reservation and subject to a maximum of 10% of the posts in each category. So 2 or 3 things that come out from just reading this clause. Okay. One is economically weaker section reservations are not horizontal reservations. It is not saying that within SC, within ST, within OBC, you can make reservation on the basis of economic basis. That is not being said here. There's an entirely separate case in that context about reservation within reservation. I'm not going into that. The second thing that they say is explicitly that this is applicable even to private educational institutions and minority educational institutions. All right. Except of course, minority educational institutions under 30 clause 1, but up to 10%, right? That's the third point. They have fixed an upper limit of how much economically weaker sections can be given benefit under this particular article. Most importantly, this is an enabling provision, all right? Like with all provisions relating to reservations, this is only an enabling provision. It doesn't automatically take effect. Government has to pass a law which says that, okay, now we are providing reservation for 5, 6, 7, 8 or 10% for people in economically weaker sections and happen accordingly. My problem with this particular law, I'm sorry, so one second point, of course, is law itself doesn't define, like with scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and OBCs, who are these backward classes, leaves it to the government to define. My specific problems with this law have to do with the new clause 6 of Article 15, specifically subclause B of clause 6 of Article 15 and clause 6 of Article 16. Okay, so it introduces 2 new clauses. There is no issue if the government wants to make special provisions for economically weaker sections, as I said earlier. But in my submission, making special provisions for economically weaker sections where such special provisions amount to a reservation of seats or reservation of posts is unconstitutional. Some people have called it an upper caste reservation, okay, because very specifically it says other than the other than the groups mentioned in clause 5 and clause 6. Sorry, clause 4 and clause 5 in Article 15 and Article 16 of the Constitution. Those classes were backward class, socially and educationally backward classes, which means scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and OBCs. This necessarily means that the only class left will be upper castes, quote unquote general category. So lots of people have said this is an upper caste reservation. Keep in mind that even within scheduled castes, Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims are expressly excluded, which means that because they don't get the benefit of SC reservations, they could potentially get the benefit of reservations under this particular clause. Now, we don't know the data. We don't know if that is what has actually happened. We don't know if, say, economically weaker Muslim OBCs, for instance. Not all Muslim OBCs are included in the list of OBCs. We don't know if they have been included for this, if they have benefited from this. That's an open question. But by and large, it seems that this is for the quote unquote general category of those who generally belong to the so-called upper castes. Now, what are the possible issues with this? As I mentioned earlier, two possible issues. One, it is going above the 50% limit laid out by the Supreme Court in the Indira Sahni judgment. Two, it is providing reservations to a category of people who do not necessarily need reservations. Okay. My argument is that there is no problem with reservations going beyond 50%. And two, reservations for a category of people who have been determined solely on the basis of family income or economic disadvantage goes against the notion of equality under our constitution. So let me start with the first main argument that I want to make, which is that going past this 50% limit is in any way against the constitution. Now, if you ask where this 50% limit comes from, those of you who are students of constitutional law will point to the Indira Sahni judgment. You'll say the Indira Sahni judgment says 50% is the limit. You have to balance questions of equality. You have to balance questions of merit. You have to ensure that there is no imbalance in this manner. So therefore 50% is the limit. Now this 50% limit, if you ask me, is pure judicial creation. It has no basis in our constitution. The reason why I say this is because when making this analysis, we have to look back to which was the first case where they even started with this 50% reservation. And then we come across the judgment of Devadasan. Okay. This was a judgment which was delivered all the way back in the 60s at P. Devadasan. And this was the first case where the Supreme Court said, we want to introduce a limit on reservation, and 50% is okay. It is just one line. The judges don't provide any reason as to why they think 50% is a good limit. Why maybe not 60%? Why not 70%? Why not 75%? But now Kannadadalli ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಲ್ಲ, ಅಂದಾಜಿಂದ 50% ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ. Right? Like how, as we say in Kannada, by looking at it roughly, we can say 50%. We all know that this may be okay. This approach may be okay in a mediation or a settlement way, or if you're resolving some land disputes. But this is not the way in which constitutional adjudication should take place. Unfortunately, what has happened is that not enough people have really questioned the court on how did you come up with this 50% limit? Because this 50% limit is something that judges have made up on their own. Like with the whole issue of the collegium, there may be, we can justify it ex post facto. ಮಾಡಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ ಏನ್ ಮಹಾ ಆಯ್ತು ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ 50% is okay. We can say maybe it's not such a bad thing. But this 50% limit has meant that people who might otherwise benefit from this reservation or who might benefit from expanded reservations are fighting for every last bit of that 50% of the reservation. Now, sorry, it was Devadasan was the second case. The first case was M.R. Balaji. M.R. Balaji was in educational institutions and it was in the context of the Mysore state from Karnataka. Devadasan was the second case. It was in the context of government jobs. Now, if you look at these two original cases, M.R. Balaji and Devadasan, they don't exactly say why there is a 50% limit. They said it depends on the facts and circumstances of the case. All right. And how are we to, and even the Indira Sahni judgment, which says 50%, doesn't actually rule out the fact that in some instances, it may need to cross 50%. There are a whole line of cases, and I don't want to go into the specifics of each one because the time is limited and any reasonable constitutional law textbook will mention all those cases. But I want to focus specifically on this idea that 50% is somehow essential to maintain equality. I don't think it is. And to give you an example of why sometimes a 50% limit does not actually indicate the truth, I want to refer to a recent judgment of the Supreme Court called Chebrolu Leela Prasad Rao. Now, I've written on this judgment, so those of you who are interested can read my critique in more detail of this judgment in EPW, this Economic and Political Weekly. It came out about 2 months ago. So this judgment was a case, if you hear about it, you'll say what is wrong, okay? The Andhra Pradesh government, before it was split into Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, said that for schools in 5th schedule areas, right, tribal areas, scheduled tribe areas, all posts of school teachers in schools in these Adivasi areas will only be filled by Adivasis. Okay. So natural corollary of this is it is 100% reservation for Adivasis. Now, you may say, how can 100% be allowed? 100% should be unconstitutional. This is what the Supreme Court says. Judgment of Justice Arun Mishra says 100% is not permissible. 100% cannot be allowed. And there is an issue relating to the powers of the governor and so on. And I won't go into that in the specific context that I'm talking about here. But one of the main criticisms of this, which Justice Arun Mishra says in the context of striking down this reservation, is to say, no, you can't have more than 50% reservation. 100% is too much. Only 50% of the posts in Adivasi schools can be filled by Adivasis. Remaining 50% has to be up for open competition. A lot of people praise this judgment, say wonderful reservation has gone wild, Supreme Court has protected it, etc., etc., etc. But what they didn't realize is that why? Why had Andhra government said seats in Adivasi schools would be reserved for Adivasi teachers? If you actually read the original government order, which says that this number schools seats in Adivasi, not seats, jobs for teachers in Adivasi schools will be reserved for Adivasi teachers, they give a very clear and a very simple explanation why. They say that Adivasi students should be given education in their own language, appropriate to their own culture, and in a manner which is suitable for their particular social and economic circumstances. Today, if I go to an Adivasi school somewhere in deep rural North Karnataka and I start talking to them in English, am I actually educating them? Obviously not. If I go to them and talk to them in Kannada, which is the Kannada spoken in Vidhan Sauda, am I actually educating them? No. Adivasis have their own dialect. Some of them may speak Kannada. Some of them may be comfortable in English. But Adivasi communities have had their own languages, their own dialects for hundreds, thousands of years. The constitution says that these rights will be protected. Adivasis have a right to govern themselves. They have a right to choose their own way of life. They have a right to, and there is a long and passionate debate about this in the Constituent Assembly. What the Andhra Pradesh government was doing was saying that all these rights have been guaranteed to Adivasis in the constitution. To protect these rights, to ensure that future generations of Adivasis grow up being proud of their culture, understanding the origins, the nuances, and being educated about the outside world in their own language and in their own culturally relevant ways, will make them good citizens of India. This was the justification offered. In the Andhra Pradesh High Court, the judges very perfectly understand this issue. They say we don't want to call it 100% reservation at all, because this is a measure intended to protect Adivasi culture and rights and people. So they upheld this particular move, even though the administrative tribunal had struck it down. Andhra Pradesh High Court in a majority of 2-1 said that this is not 100% reservation. Even if you assume it's 100% reservation, it's 100% reservation which has a constitutionally sound policy backing it. And therefore they upheld it. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court did not see it in that perspective. The Supreme Court was so obsessed with this 50% limit that they did not even understand that there might be a justification for going beyond 50%. So therefore, my argument is this 50% limit, it imposes an artificial mathematical limit to a measure that is supposed to ensure equality. Go back to what I said in the context of Justice Chinnaparetty's paragraph. reservations are for parity, not for charity, which means a law providing for reservations must ensure that equality is the outcome. Even though today, on paper, you might say, why is somebody who's getting 10 marks less than me getting admission in a college that I want to get simply because they belong to scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, or OBC, and so on? I'll be fully fair here. I said exactly the same thing when I was a student. I was exactly a student. I was a student who believed reservations are terrible. They're bad because I am a general category student. I am so much more meritorious. I got so much more marks. Why is somebody else who didn't get as many marks as me getting admission into this place? I have said that. But I've changed my mind on this because I understand that growing up in a privileged household, I had access to so many things that people from other less privileged households did not have. Even if somebody had that kind of privilege, let us say somebody belonging to a Dalit community did go to a good school, did go to a, were involved, maybe their parents were in the IAS or their parents were some well-off job. The fact remains that we are thinking that one generation is enough to undo 20 generations of injustice. We are thinking that that maybe somebody who belongs to an upper caste has enjoyed 20 generations of benefit of having education, of having access to power, of simply being treated like a human being, as opposed to somebody who has had only one, maybe two generations of it, right? So when we are thinking about merit, we are not thinking about an exam. Let's understand that. When we say somebody is meritorious, unfortunately, the Supreme Court thinks merit is something that can only be found in an exam. If you get a certain mark, you're meritorious. If you don't get this mark, you're not meritorious. That's not true. Our constitution has much larger goals and objectives of Indians about how Indian society should be than just saying everybody should score a certain kind of mark in an exam if they have to get into a particular educational institution. So therefore, when we understand equality, when we understand reservations, we have to think of them as a measure to enhance equality. So when we say if a reservation is constitutional, we have to see, is this reservation enhancing equality or in any way reducing it? And equality not between two individuals. Keep in mind, reservations are a system. It is not about saying whether X should get admission or Y should get admission. Whether X or Y gets admission is a consequence of the system. If the system enhances equality, there may be some instances which, if you look at it microscopically, may not seem fair. But you look at the larger system. The system exists in a wider society, in a wider social context. And in that wider context, the system may be much more than fair. The system may be trying to undo injustice that has been done to many communities in this country over generations. So when we think about reservations, go back, I would always say, go back to what Justice Chinnappa Reddy said in Vasanta Kumar in the context of this. When we think as constitutional lawyers about reservations, when we read articles 15.4, 15.5, and now 15.6, we have to see, not 15.6, but 15.4 and 15.5, we have to see that these are not articles which are creating exceptions to equality. That is also what Indira Sahni tries to say. When the constitution, when the amendments were made to the constitution to insert clauses 4 and 5 to articles 15 and 16, they were not creating exceptions. The mistake we make is thinking about clauses 2 to 6 of article 19, which were introduced as reasonable restrictions in the first amendment. We think that this must also be exception to Article 16, Article 15 and 16, which provides for equality of opportunity and equality of employment. But they are in fact facets of Article 14. If you see Article 14 doesn't just say that everybody should be equal before law, right? The Article 14 is not simply saying that everyone it's not creating a legal fiction that everyone is equal before law. It is also saying that everyone will enjoy the equal protection of the laws. There is both a formal aspect to the right to equality under our constitution, which is that law will treat everyone equally, but also a substantive aspect of it. And this substantive aspect of it, when we are looking for what is the true meaning of equality under our constitution, we cannot just look at Article 14 alone without the context of Articles 15, 16, 17, and 18. I would even argue that Part 4 of the Constitution, where it provides for directive principles of state responsibility, also give the state a mandate to ensure equality under the equal protection of laws for everyone. When the Constitution in Article 39 says that there shall be no concentration of resources in a few hands, they don't just mean that, and sorry for being politically incorrect here, Vikram may be slightly upset, that the Reddy brothers will have all the mines. They don't necessarily mean that Robert Vadra will have all the real estate licenses in Gurgaon. What they mean also is that the common resources of society, in terms of educational seats, in terms of posts in government, they will also not all be limited in very few hands. So if we have to understand equality under our constitution, we have to think of it in a larger perspective, not in a microscopic formal perspective of saying, does this law treat these two, does this particular instance of these two individuals, are they equal or not? If you think about it, if today, I mean, everyone in this room is a lawyer. Everyone has gone through either the 3 years or the 5-year bar course. If tomorrow the Bar Association, not the Bar Association, the Bar Council of India introduces a requirement saying that, for being a lawyer, you will now have to run 100 meters in less than, 10 seconds. Obviously, we will all protest. Obviously, we will say, we studied the law. We spent 5 years, 3 years doing this. Now, why are you asking whether we have to run? Bar Council might say, since all of you have to run from court to court to court for handling so many cases, running is an important skill for lawyers, so we wanted to know how well you run. Imagine if somebody who is asked to write an exam barely has electricity in their house. Their parents cannot help them because their parents are not educated in and of themselves. Their parents don't have access to tuitions. Their parents can't even afford the fees in most schools. And you're saying that the child from this community should also compete on an equal footing just because the law says equality with somebody whose parents can provide all of those things. Where is the equality in that? When you're trying to when you're trying to look at equality in comparing two individuals, you have to compare their life circumstances also. We can't just compare two individuals' marks cards and say, this person is more equal, that person is less equal, and therefore, and so on. So, which is why I want to move to the next part of my argument, and I've already taken a bit of time, which is that why I argue that economically weaker reservations for economically weaker sections are unconstitutional. If you look at the Indrasani judgment, of course, it says the 50% part, which I disagree with, which is wrong. But the part that it gets right is that in India, class is determined by caste. You may counter this by saying this was in 1991, 92, 93, 94, whenever the Indrasani judgment came out in the context of OBC reservations. But I would argue that if anybody, and if we had the data, well, we won't have the data from the census for quite a while, but if you look at any of the data which is available from the censuses and the various surveys that the government carries out, you will find that the social and economic indicators across communities are so different that class in India is almost exactly caste. You will find whether when it comes to educational attainment, when it comes to salaried jobs, when it comes to pakka housing and material benefits, you will find that the distribution of all of this is very skewed in favor of otherwise privileged and well-off castes. Not to say that that the average is the ideal type, right? Not to say that every person who belongs to a certain caste necessarily has these attributes. I don't dispute that there are rich Dalits. I don't dispute that there are poor Brahmins. The point of reservations is to not provide for poor Brahmins or to shut out rich Dalits. Again, I will go back to the earlier point. Reservations were meant for parity and not for charity. Reservations were meant to give an opportunity to those who did not have it. When you say income criteria, you're assuming, and this is when I say you and I mean the government, and when I mean the government, I mean the provisions here. They assume that your caste, your religion, your gender, whether you're a tribal, all of these don't play a role when your income is low, quote unquote low. If all of these play a role in your income status, in your income status, they're already provided for, reservations are already provided for such people, right? Therefore, what you are essentially doing is creating a space for people who otherwise enjoy privilege, but to only happen to not fall above a certain income limit. What I'm trying to say is that poverty in India is not an ill in and of itself. Poverty just doesn't happen. Poverty isn't just the result of bad luck. I mean, for a small number of people, it's possible. But even there, I have a nuanced argument to make. Poverty isn't something that, one day, Papa, I tappa, yen madadu. That's not the kind of thing that we're talking about. Poverty in India has structural causes. Poverty in India is usually because of where you were born, who you were born to, what caste you were born to, what gender you were in, whether you were tribal or whether you were not. These are the factors which cause poverty. What economically weaker sections reservation is trying to do is to say, we don't care about any of that. We will not address any of the underlying causes for poverty. We will only use the external facet of it and say that you are poor, right? And economically weaker sections. What this does is to put people who are suffering from structural poverty and people who may have some bad luck and face poverty on the same footing, which is essentially treating unequals as equals, which fundamentally goes against the idea of inequality. Again, keep in mind, I'm not saying don't do anything good for, say, the poor Brahmin. Don't do it, or I'm not saying don't provide any measures for somebody who might have bad luck. By all means do. But reservations are a system. You're not picking and choosing individuals to give them some benefit. You are creating a system which is trying to address inequality in India. It is my argument that by simply rejecting the structural causes of inequality, by simply saying that poverty just happens like that, and whether you're upper caste or, well, now if you're a economically person from economically weaker section and you're a scheduled caste, you don't get that benefit also, except if you're a Dalit Christian or a Dalit Muslim or an OBC Muslim. You don't get that benefit also. You are essentially creating a system which favors the privileged in some ways. Privilege may not mean that they have a lot of wealth. Let us not assume that privilege means you shall automatically have a lot of wealth. Privilege can mean that when you go to the cop, they can tell in 5 seconds what caste you belong to, and suddenly the tone of their voice will change. I'm sure a lot of you have practiced here in Bangalore. A lot of you have practiced here in the various parts of Karnataka, maybe. But you can try this test if you want. When you speak to a police officer, see how they speak to you. See the terms that they use when you speak to them. Now, see how they speak to a person who very obviously does not belong to a privileged caste, or women, or somebody who may be an advocate just like you, but may sound different, right? They may not speak Kannada in the same way that some upper castes do. See how cops' perceptions changes. This is something that is deeply ingrained in our society. It is not something that happened yesterday or overnight or something that will disappear like that if we do this or if we do that. We have been deeply ingrained, all of us. This training happens to us not because we went to any particular school where they taught us, but this is how society informs each and every one of us. We are told there are people of a certain caste whom we should look up to. There are people of a certain caste whom we should look down upon. And this is an ironclad rule that there is no sense of, you should be nice to them or be not nice to them and so on and so forth. It's there. It's just the rule. This system is something that our constitutional framers wanted to break. When Dr. Ambedkar was drafting our constitution, what he had in mind was the annihilation of caste. He knew it was not going to happen just by putting an Article 14 or putting an Article 15 or even abolishing untouchability or abolishing manual scavenging. He knew it would take a lot of effort. He knew it would take a lot of legislative measures. And reservations were therefore needed to move to ensure that caste as a situation, as an evil in society is removed. What unfortunately the present, economically weaker section reservation does is to deny the role of caste. It is a measure made for some other country. It is not made to tackle a problem in India. It is not meant to ensure equality in India. What it does is to say that we will take one indicator of your life, one aspect, one indicator, and say that therefore this makes you unequal theoretically, and therefore we will give you this benefit of this system. This, in my view, goes against the very idea of equality under our constitution. This goes against the very notion of what is equality. It goes against the very idea of why reservations are justified. Because, and this is the point that I want to leave you with, the caste system was a form of reservation in and of itself. The caste system said that irrespective of how good or how bad you are at a job, by birth you're entitled to do certain jobs, by birth you're not entitled to do certain jobs. If we are going to reintroduce the caste system in this way and just use economic criteria as an excuse, we are fundamentally going against what our constitution was meant for. We are fundamentally violating the basic tenets of our constitution. There are a lot of cases, and I don't want to just go to that. In fact, I can share the relevant passages with you where the judges have spoken about how equality is a part of the basic features of the constitution. It is part of the basic structure of the constitution. The judgment in Keshwananda Bharati, Justice Jagan Mohan Reddy, and later on Justice Chandrachud in Indira Gandhi's case have said that this equality is a basic feature of our constitution. But this equality is, and to repeat, is not just a formal fictional equality. It is not X is equal to Y just because the law says so. It is, of course, ensuring that everyone is equal in the eyes of law, but also that there is substantive equality in society. The Constitution of India was intended to ensure that there will be substantive equality in society. It's my argument, therefore, that in granting reservations to economically weaker sections, what the 103rd Amendment does is to reinforce inequality in society by saying that we will just look at your income. We will not look at your other advantages that you have earned by caste or gender and so on, and give you the benefit of a system. And therefore, I believe this is why it's unconstitutional. So to very quickly summarize, 103rd Constitutional Amendment is something that tries to provide for reservations in seats and in jobs for economically weaker sections. It will probably it means that the government can go beyond the 10% limit, and I don't think that is per se a 50% limit up to 10%. I don't think that is per se a problem. The Constitution never intended for a hard and fast 50% limit on reservations in any instance. The whole approach of seeing this as a 50% limit, I believe, is unconstitutional. And therefore, there's no issue with that. Second point that I want to make is that by identifying this class of people who will get reservation on the basis of income and not looking at underlying reasons for inequality, this therefore goes against the Constitution's very core basic idea of what equality is and how Indian Constitution and how Indian society should be equal. And therefore, It is my view that the 103rd Constitution Amendment, when it comes to reservations for economically weaker sections, is against the basic structure of the Constitution. So with that, I will end what I have to say. I'd be happy to take your questions. Thank you so much. Tumba ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಕೇಳಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ. ನಮಗೇನು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಇದೆಯೋ ಕೇಳಿ. Please feel free to ask me in Kannada or in English. ನಾನು ಎರಡು ಭಾಷೆನಲ್ಲೂ ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಎಷ್ಟಾಗುತ್ತೋ ಎರಡು ಭಾಷೆನಲ್ಲೂ ಉತ್ತರ ಕೊಡಕ್ಕೆ ಟ್ರೈ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ವಿಕ್ರಮ್ ಅವರೇ, ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನ ಹೋಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಲಾ ನಾನು ಇವಾಗ?
ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಡಿ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು. Thank you for sharing your views, Mr. Alok. Yes, I've got the options now. Mr. Chandrasekhar has a question.
Sure.
Sir, do you have any other scheme to give some stability to the person of economically weaker section?
Okay. So my suggestion would, of course, be scholarships. I think what has happened, and this is my other grouse in life, I think too much of higher education is becoming out of reach for large sections of the population. If you look at the fees being charged in national law universities, if you look at the kind of fees that private universities are charging, it has turned higher education completely away from the hands of an person of the economically weaker section. The government should set a goal that no person will be forced to give up higher education because they cannot afford it. Now, this may mean creating free ships, creating scholarships, creating fee waivers. All of this are perfectly valid and constitutional measures. If you want to say that somebody cannot afford to pay the fees of this particular institution, government can definitely create a measure for that, to say 100% fee waiver. Unfortunately, this is not happening as often as it should. Government has said, we will set up these few institutions, they will charge a lot of fees. If you can get them and pay the fees, good for you. If you can't, too bad. I think that is what the government can do. And what this will do is put pressure to reduce fees across the board. If private schools see that government is subsidizing education and quality education, not just because college, but all quality government institutions are charging low fees, there will be pressure also on the private entities to reduce their fees. And of course, there is a need to regulate the fees also. I think far too much is being charged. I think the government can have a scheme whereby some of you may be aware of IDIA, which is an initiative which trains students from underprivileged backgrounds to write the law exams, to make sure that they pass and get into law universities and support them. Why is an NGO doing it? IDIA is amazing. I fund them. I give them a lot of money. I'm very happy with their work. But to me, this is something that the government should be doing. A government like Karnataka, which is generally well off, should say that we will identify 100 students from underprivileged backgrounds on whatever basis, economically weaker sections, SC, ST, people who might not have had access to quality education. We'll identify 100 of the brightest children who are willing to work hard on this, and we will ensure they get into IIT, IIM, NLUs, wherever it is that they want to do so. Government can do that. Definitely they can do that. It requires an investment in time, it requires an investment in money, it requires an investment in political will. I am 100% for such measures like this. I'm not so sure that changing the reservation system is the way to do so. Sir, there's a second part to this question. It's a very relevant question. I'll just take that. Do you have any scheme to see that the fruits of reservation reach at least once the scheduled caste or scheduled tribe? Now, we've seen that, and this is a problem across the country, certain dominant scheduled castes, and dominant is not perhaps the right word, but better off scheduled castes and scheduled tribes enjoy the benefits of reservation. This is a problem because there is, even within scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, there are hierarchies, there are worse off communities. Bihar has the concept of Mahadalits and the concept of extremely backward castes and so on. I am not a full expert on this, but I know someone who is, Mr. Anup Surendranath, who is a professor at NLU Delhi. He did his thesis on this, and his suggestion was, instead of just putting all scheduled castes into one big block, what the government should do, state or central, is to say that the worse off castes should get first priority. So that means if within scheduled castes, the government has to see who is better off and who is worse off. So supposing you find that members of caste A are almost unrepresented even in scheduled caste category, you should give them first priority, then to those who are slightly better represented, then you're slightly better represented, so on and so forth. So there is a way to create a prioritization which will allow for more castes within scheduled castes to get this benefit. Likewise, scheduled tribes and OBCs and so on. Subcategorization is necessary, but how to do this subcategorization is a question. There is a case pending in the Supreme Court. It has just got referred to a 7-judge bench. Professor Anup Surendranath argues that the E.V. Chennaiah judgment, which is usually the basis for saying that no subcategorization is allowed, is been decided incorrectly. Supreme Court has said E.V. Chennaiah has not been decided correctly. There are problems with the judgment referring it to a 7-judge bench, but this whole question should be re-examined. How do we ensure that every caste, irrespective of its position in like society, gets the benefit of reservations if it belongs to the scheduled caste category?
Right. Thank you, Mr. Alok. Now we have Mrs. Rukmini who has a question. Ma'am, I am unmuting you. You may kindly pose your question.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, as you were telling about the reservation, like, okay, you're against the 50% reservations and all. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can. Please go ahead.
We are already independent 70 plus years. But still, if you argue that 50% is against the basic structure of the Constitution, then where are we going to place these SCs and STs, sir, if we are not given? I feel, in my opinion, as I've come back, I've seen the rural side also, as you've told that. Don't you think 50% plus is required to bring these SCs and STs
fully
in educational?
Fully.
If not in employment, at least. If in educational thing, it is unnecessary.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. When I said this 50% limit, what the Supreme Court has said, I think there is a need to increase the existing scope of reservations. I think what has unfortunately not happened is that we haven't looked at our social and economic caste census data to see how much reservation, what is the percentage of SC and STs in our population, and redraw the reservations accordingly. I think definitely that has to be increased. And I'm not just saying it's only for OBCs that the government should go past the 50% limit. I'm saying the sum of SC, ST plus OBC should definitely, if required, where you see that the data says that it should definitely be allowed to go past 50%. This limit of 50% to me is utterly artificial, utterly unjustified. And I think that Tamil Nadu, for instance, I think it is about 74%. I'm perfectly fine with that. Tamil Nadu has tried to ensure that as many castes get the benefit of reservation as possible. There's a case pending in the Supreme Court. I do think that Tamil Nadu deserves to win that case because they have a constitutionally valid reason for going past 50%. And in any case, I don't think there is a reason to have 50% at all. If a state wants 67% reservation, like I gave you that example in that case from M.R. Balaji case, which came from the state of Mysore in the Supreme Court, then Mysore state had put 68% reservation. If a state feels this is the status of the people in our state, this is the true reality of discrimination, this is the true reality of economic deprivation, and we feel that 68% is necessary, then court should only see, is it actually true that there is deprivation? It should not bother itself about 45, 50, 55, 60, 65% limit. That's all.
And you were telling about the IIT.
Yeah.
Use.
Sorry, you were saying.
For example, the recent NLSU of Bangalore, sir.
Yeah.
Why is that discrimination?
Sorry, I didn't get your question fully. Could you just repeat that?
Yeah. Sir, when we were talking and discussing about the reservations,
yeah.
What about the IITs, the IIMs and the NLSU, sir? Why that reservation is not done there? What are they? Are they that superior in teaching?
So as far as I know, SC, ST reservations are there in IITs and in NLS. I don't think they are there in IIMs. And to me, I agree with you. If they are government institutions, they should equally be. It is not about preserving merit or anything like that. To me, it's just a simple matter of, will you give people an opportunity, right? And I think that is what basically reservations do. They give an opportunity to people who don't have it. NLSIU, as far as I know, has scheduled caste and scheduled tribe reservations, but not OBC reservations.
OBC is not there.
OBC is not there. I would agree that it is necessary, because what happens otherwise is these institutions become elite. They become for only the rich and the privileged. And that is not the purpose of government spending on education. Government should be spending on education to make it as accessible to as many people as possible and to benefit society at large, not just to ensure that some very rich people can get nice fancy degrees and nice law firm jobs in, other places. I mean, no offense to people who have those jobs, but I'm criticizing the government. They're probably very nice. They're my friends also. But I'm saying that the government's policies are what is the source of the problem here. Government has to ensure that institutions which it has funded, it has set up, it supports, which carry the tag of statutory institutions or that has to be ensured. I think, any more questions, Vikram?
Yes, we have one last question by Mr. Satyanarayan Gupta. Yes, sir, I have unmuted you.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, please.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Alok. Wonderful.
Yes,
your presentation was very nice. Sir, my simple question is, how many years this reservation policy should continue according to you?
I have a very simple answer for that, sir. I will say reservation policy should continue till one day I or you or anybody will pick up a newspaper in India, go to the matrimonial section, and not one person mentions caste there. The day I find that nobody has mentioned that Brahmin or Agarwal or Thakur or whatever caste it is, the day I find that there is not a single matrimonial ad which mentions that we want a bride of this caste or a groom of this caste, that is the day I will confidently say there is no need for reservations in India.
Oh,
I mean,
wonderful.
People may agree or disagree with me on that one, but this is a very simple test for me,
There is
sir.
no question of disagreeing, Mr. Alok. There is no question of disagreeing.
Yeah.
No, because, so according to you, this policies, this reservation policy go on forever.
It should go on for as long as until we see that fundamental change in Indian society, sir. I think that fundamental change needs to happen, because I hope not forever, because that means that change is not happening. I think reservations are supposed to ensure that social change is happening. And if the social change is not happening, we are not seeing that caste breakdown in the way that we want it to, then we have to rethink reservation. That means we have to make them better, not take it away entirely and say we'll do nothing. But my point is, we need this as long as fundamentally this kind of inequality is there in our society. One, again, the way that inequality comes up in another context is matrimonial ads. So it's not possible for me to individually go and see if, what is the status of everyone. Government will have their statistics. But for me as an ordinary citizen, the day I see that when you put out a matrimonial ad, you're only looking for somebody who's good, who's cultured, who's educated, who has this family background, and you don't mention the word caste anywhere, any caste anywhere, that will be the day I think, okay, Indian society has fundamentally changed. And then I will be able to say in good faith, maybe we don't need reservations.
Okay. Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, Mr. Alok, thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Vikram.
sharing your views, and thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing your views and presenting the webinar for us. Thank you so much. On behalf of Advocates Association Bengaluru, my heartfelt thanks to you. With this, we'll be concluding today's session.
Okay. Thank you. It was my pleasure to speak to you all. And ಈ ಅವಕಾಶ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.
ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು, Mr. Alok. With your permission, now we'll be signing off today's webinar.
Definitely.